Now, our main news this morning is about the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, who said Britain faces the fight of our generation against extremists.
He's warning that police are giving in to Islamists because it's just too challenging to confront them.
Well, let's talk to former Immigration Minister Kevin Foster, who's here in the studio. Do you agree with what Robert's had to say?
I do. Robert's raking some very strong points. You know, we saw the performance this week from particularly the Chief Constable of the West Midlands Police. You know, the man who's supposed to be enforcing the law in the West Midlands, particularly around Birmingham, in which it turns out that far from it being the football fans that they tried to blame being the problem, it was apparently local extremists who might attack them, which prompted them to ban Jewish football fans fundamentally from coming to a football match in Birmingham. There is a real debate there. And also we should ask ourselves as a country, how come the UAE, you know, the United Arab Emirates, to give it its full name, is now advising students from its own country that they shouldn't really study here because they might be indoctrinated with an extremist ideology. And many times they've challenged the fact that things like the Muslim Brotherhood are legal here, but are actually banned in many Islamic countries around the world. You know, this isn't about Islam, this isn't about the actual religion, this is about a strain of it, particularly propagated by the Islamic Republic of Iran, that is such a dangerous threat.
Well, how have you managed to get to this point, though, where people and councils and even the police now are just too afraid to say anything for fear of offending anyone?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Stephen. There's been this sort of culture that's developed, you know, and I'm not going to make party political points. It didn't just start on the 5th of July 2024. And it's not just about politicians, although you can look at the way some politicians relied on certain block votes in some of our bigger cities to get elected, which has probably coloured their judgment on some of this. But you can, there's been this idea that, oh, we can't offend people, we have to tolerate attitudes. Sometimes tolerating attitudes and expression of views that denigrate women, that go back hundreds of years in terms of attitude, and which actually are sometimes outright racist, particularly against Jewish people. So, you know, there's been this sort of culture that it was somehow woke, it was somehow diverse, it was good, it was strengthening us to allow people to preach things that are absolutely unbelievable. You know, if someone said it in a church, there'd be absolute outcry, yet somehow it's sort of tolerated because it's somehow different.
Well, you hear that rhetoric, don't you, time and again. We've sort of flattered ourselves that we are a very tolerant, loving society. We embrace other cultures. Maybe we've done a bit too much embracing.
Absolutely, and I think you'd see there are people, and what's really strange, particularly if you look at things like the grooming gang scandal, sometimes those who would like to say are progressive, liberal, you know, defenders of rights, are the ones then to have turned a blind eye to absolutely appalling behaviour towards some of the most vulnerable people in our society, because that wouldn't fit with the narrative they have. A bit like, you know, we've seen very few of those people who are apparently great champions of human rights in the Middle East out on the streets supporting the demonstrators in Iran who are literally being gunned down by a dictatorship. So, you know, there's this sort of culture that's been allowed to develop, and Rob's absolutely right to challenge it down. I hope people will take seriously what he says.
Your personal data could be exposed right now without you even knowing it. And if you want it removed, use incogni.com/GB News in the description now and get 60% off an annual plan on us. Incogni reach out to the data brokers on your behalf and request that your information be deleted from their databases. And they'll keep sending removal requests to make sure your data stays gone. Sometimes your information ends up on strange, obscure websites that automated tools just can't reach. And that's why Incogni just launched their unlimited plan with a feature called Custom Removals. With this, you can submit any link where your personal information appears, literally paste in the URL, and their privacy team will investigate and work to get it removed. And getting started is super easy. Hit the link in the description, create an Incogni account, and tell them whose data you want removed. Grant them permission to work on your behalf, and then all you've got to do is sit back and relax. They'll keep you updated along the way. Incogni is totally risk-free for 30 days. If you try it, it's not for you, you'll get a full refund. So take back control of your personal data today with Incogni. Use our code GBNews at checkout via the link in the description, and you'll get 60% off an annual plan.
Well, the issue is, and he makes a very good point just by doing this, is that you've got to be able to challenge these things, to call them out, whilst at the same time saying, we're not having a pop at all Muslims, It's not all about Muslims. It's not all, it is about a radical fringe.
Absolutely. You can look at some of the commentary that there's been this week following Reform announcing their candidate for Mayor of London. And, some people who are regularly point the stick at Nigel find that, Nigel's there actually making clear that, I'm prepared to support I'm supporting someone with this background and against absolute trolls online. So, there has been a sort of culture of trying to cancel people, shut down debate. I remember one year, I think Amber Rudd gave a speech and someone tried to get it listed as a non-crime hate incident. There's been this whole thing of just wanting to shut down this debate, shout cheap slogans, and actually the fact that, let's be clear, if this debate has been had 8-9 years ago without GB News, probably someone like Robert would be being absolutely slated by much of the mainstream media.
But that's going to happen. I mean, I was going to say, how do you reverse what's happened, or at least how do you pull back from it without sounding what you would actually be accused of, a sort of right-wing fascist?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. We'll get people who always like to chuck out slogans. I always find it interesting that people who accuse people of being a fascist, I always say, well, it's strange, because actually where there are real fascists around the world, there's no way you'd make that accusation because, of course, of what would then happen to you. Someone like Iran, where they might dress differently, but, it's safe to say their attitude to human rights is exactly the same as those in Europe who used to dress up in black. So for me, it is about how do we have a sensible debate about this? How do we challenge this? And I do hope that people will engage, particularly also on the left-wing part of politics, because actually a lot of what they fought for, more progressive rights, gender rights, LGBT rights, a lot of that's going to be lost if this strain of Islamist opinion is what is allowed to dominate and is somewhat, in many ways, sort of coached. But, when you saw masked thugs take the streets in Birmingham back in August 24, and somehow that was excused by a Home Office minister as they were sort of protecting themselves against the far right, absolutely ridiculous stuff. The law needs to apply fairly.
I mean, is it simple enough to say we need to just be more British? We are a country with our own identity and our own culture, and if you want to live here, it's not saying you can't be different, but you've still got to conform to our overall society and rules.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable to say we do need to be more of the country that stood up and, held the flame of freedom alight when the rest of Europe entered darkness back in the 1940s. And, it's not about saying you must believe what I believe, For example, I'm a Christian. I accept the fact that people won't believe my faith or criticise it or have very different views on it. But that is the cause. You accept this is a country where people can practice freely, not just do what you do.
So what do you think is going to happen, or what's behind the government's view now? They're announcing, aren't they? They're going to review this term Islamophobia. I mean, what's happening there? Are we going to find ourselves entrapped yet again in not being able to even debate the situation or criticise because we will be accused of some new definition of Islamophobia? Well,
it's certainly a concern. I think the Free Speech Union is doing some fantastic work around challenging some of this idea. But, it's not that long ago we had a Labour MP stand up, I think it was at Prime Minister's Question Time, and demand a blasphemy law about, insulting prophets of Abrahamic faith, without actually realising the irony of what he said is that actually the Christian faith, denying Christ's divinity is blasphemy. Well, I don't think it should be a blasphemy law in the 21st century, but you've seen that behind the scenes. You saw the attempt to prosecute someone for insulting the pillars of Islam. That was absolutely wrong. Thankfully overturned, but it took a lot of legal support and actually fair support from Robert Jenrick for that to happen.
Yeah, because there's plenty of stuff that goes on which is critical of Christianity, for example. I mean, it's on TV shows, comedy, all the rest of it, and we're expected to, and indeed often do, laugh at it. We're not taking it. It's like if it's any other religion, it's taken much more seriously.
Yeah, it's about, I accept the fact that I live in a democratic society and there's things that would be highly offensive to me as a Christian, but are perfectly reasonable free speech for someone to question what the tenets of the faith, and that's what you said. But yes, there is some reluctance we get elsewhere. But then again, we have seen good examples, things, if you remember Citizen Come, which actually the BBC produced, which actually poked fun at some of these issues that we're seeing now coming forward. But we've all got to be more prepared to discuss this. And I do hope that a lot of people won't just see this as, you know, a Conservative Party spokesperson, but look at the issues it's bringing up, because they are it's a real cancer in our society if we allow Islamism to grow. You know, this is the idea that, you know, one faith dominates. This isn't the idea that you share and respect each other. And those who describe themselves as progressive should be as keen to stop that happening as anyone on the right of politics.
Do you think Robert Jenrick is moving towards Reform UK?
I don't think so. I think Rob is setting out what he feels, what he campaigned for in his leadership campaign. You know, I was one of the people who campaigned for him and supported him. And yes, this is an issue that, to be fair, members of Reform UK are bringing up as well. So, you know, I hope it's a debate that isn't just the Conservative and the Reform Party having it. I think it's one that we do need to have more generally across society. But, you know, look, Rob's been probably one of the most high-profile people over the last couple of years, pushing for what he believes in. But, you know, we're both members